Dinner always had a script. My mother would praise my sister, my father would nod, and I'd play the role of invisible guest star. But that night, something shifted. As Mom beamed at Maya and said, "You're the one we're proud of," I didn't flinch. I smiled. I offered to clear the plates. And in the kitchen, as the water ran over her favourite china, I whispered, "You can keep your pride. I've spent 40 years living without it." She blinked. I dried my hands, thanked her for dinner, and left. That's how you shatter a legacy, with a sentence too soft to scream. The roast chicken was dry, the mashed potatoes lukewarm, and the wine bottle sat just out of reach. Deliberately, I suspected. My mother's passive-aggressive rituals were as dependable as the linen napkins she ironed for every Sunday dinner. Across from me, Maya sparkled. She always did. Perfect teeth, perfect kids, perfect anecdotes rehearsed to fill every silence. Her husband wasn't there, work trip she claimed, but his absence felt more like escape. My father stirred his peas with calculated boredom. He rarely spoke during dinners like these, preferring to nod in rhythm with Maya's stories, as if agreeing were a form of survival. I sat quietly, chewing chicken that felt like sawdust, and waited for the inevitable moment. It always came, like clockwork. Maya was recounting Clara's advanced reading level, how the preschool teacher said she might skip a grade. My mother was glowing. Then came the pause, fork lowered, napkin dabbed at lips, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Maya," she said, her voice reverent, "I honestly don't know how you do it all. You're the one we're proud of." The words weren't shocking. I'd heard their variations for decades. Maya has always had such drive. You two are just different. But this time it landed differently, maybe because there was no attempt at subtlety, no caveats, no effort to cushion the blow. My father shifted in his seat. Maya offered a soft, faux modest laugh. "Oh, Mom." I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. I reached for my water, not the wine, and swallowed the lump in my throat, like it was part of the meal. "Anyone want help clearing?" I asked, with a smile that felt stapled on. In the kitchen, I scraped leftovers into the trash with a kind of quiet fury that had been brewing for years. My mother joined me, humming like everything was fine, drying forks that had never touched her lips. She moved like we were part of a choreographed ballet, like this was just another dance of silence and duty. When the dishwasher door clicked shut, I turned to her. I wasn't angry. I was done. Done being quiet, being polite, being the helper who never made waves. I leaned in just enough and said, "You can keep your pride. I've spent 40 years living without it." She blinked, just once, like someone realizing the gas had been on too long. I smiled, dried my hands, and said, "Thanks for dinner." Then I left. The air outside bit at my cheeks as I stepped onto the porch. It was cool, quiet, the kind of stillness that made you wonder if the world had paused just long enough to let you make a choice. I didn't look back at the door. I never looked back anymore. That was a habit I'd spent a lifetime trying to break. The neighbourhood was sleepy, porch lights flickering like tiny, nervous beacons. I walked home without checking my phone, without rehearsing what I'd said or wondering what they thought. For once, I wasn't cleaning up after my words. I let them sit there, like the dirty dishes still soaking in Mom's sink. At home, I poured a glass of the red I'd been saving. Not for an occasion, just for a night I felt like I'd earned it. I didn't put on music. I didn't scroll. I just sat there letting the weight of the moment settle into the silence. Not the brittle silence of dinner tables and unspoken slights. This one felt heavier, honest. It was the sound of a legacy cracking. When I was a child, I used to imagine that if I were just a little more helpful, a little more invisible, I might one day earn the words Maya got so freely. "We're proud of you." I would fold towels without being asked, volunteer for carpool, say thank you too often, hoping one day my mother would look at me and see someone worth admiring. But admiration never came, only instructions. "Can you run and get more ice? Would you mind helping your sister with the kids while she finishes her call?" Always the assistant, never the star. Tonight, I didn't want admiration. I wanted distance. There's something odd about doing something bold and not immediately regretting it. My stomach didn't twist, my hands didn't shake. What I felt instead was clarity, cool, clean, like the first deep breath after a storm. I thought about the look on my mother's face. Not shocked, not wounded, just flickered, like a light bulb unsure if it should turn on. I wondered if she'd say anything to Maya, or if she'd tuck the moment away like so many others, filed under Rachel being sensitive. A notification buzzed on my phone, but I let it go. I already knew who it was. The group text, the one where Maya sent photos of her kids, Dad dropped in once a week with vague, "Hope you're all doing okay," and Mom replied only to Maya's messages. I didn't open it. I wasn't ready to return to the script. Instead, I leaned back, glass in hand, and let the silence expand. For the first time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like room. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Light filtered through the blinds in thin stripes, slicing across the hardwood floor like truth cutting through memory. My phone had vibrated itself off the nightstand overnight. Messages, missed calls, all waiting. I ignored them. I moved slowly, deliberately. Made coffee, burnt toast, stood barefoot on the cold tile like it might ground me. But eventually, curiosity won out. I reached for my phone and unlocked it. Lindsay, Maya, 5 messages. Dad, even a cousin I hadn't heard from in months. All variations of confusion and subtle blame, but the one that stopped me was Maya's. "Mom's in tears and won't talk to anyone. What did you do?" I stared at it, the question so absurd it made me laugh, sharp, quiet, bitter. I didn't reply, not yet. Because deep down, I knew what that message really meant. You broke the illusion. You said what we all knew, but weren't allowed to admit. It wasn't the first time, just the first time I hadn't walked it back. They were scrambling, trying to make sense of the story now that the quiet daughter had spoken out of turn. Trying to recast me as the villain in a script where I'd spent decades as stage crew. I sat on the couch and thought of all the times I'd made things easier. All the times I swallowed feelings for the sake of harmony. The birthday parties I helped plan for Maya's kids while mine passed with a text. The hours I spent watching over Mom during her treatments because Maya was too overwhelmed. The promotions I never mentioned, the relationships I didn't talk about, the loneliness I dressed up as independence, and through it all, the hope that one day, just once, my mother might say, "I'm proud of you." Not anymore. That night's dinner had ended more than a meal. It ended a chapter I didn't realize I was still writing. There's a quiet kind of revolution in telling the truth, not loudly, not cruelly, just plainly, and letting it sit there, unedited. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, especially not the people who had only ever noticed my silence when it stopped serving them. I turned my phone to airplane mode, placed it face down, and opened a book I'd started months ago but never finished. It felt like the right time to begin again. When I was 17, I nearly disappeared. Not in the literal sense, but in the way people do when they start to fold themselves into the edges of the lives around them. I was valedictorian of my class, offered a full scholarship to the University of Oregon. I remember the envelope, heavy, official, pulsing with possibility. I'd left it on the kitchen counter where Mom would see it. She didn't mention it for 3 days. When she finally did, it was after dinner. Maya had just left to go find herself in Europe. Dad was working nights back then, trying to hold everything together. Mom sat across from me, her eyes tired, her voice soft like she was telling me a bedtime story. "I don't know how I'll manage with your sister gone. The house feels so empty already." I nodded. "She's always needed more time to figure things out. You've always been the responsible one." Another nod. "I just don't know how I'll do it all alone." The third nod almost broke me. She never said don't go, never asked me to stay. She simply laid the emotional bricks around me so carefully I didn't even realize it was a wall until I was too exhausted to climb out. I declined the scholarship. I told everyone it was because I wanted to stay close to home, help with things. Everyone nodded, grateful. Nobody asked what I wanted. That's the thing about being the reliable one. Your dreams get filed under nice to have, while everyone else's crises become priority mail. Maya called from hostels in Amsterdam, told me about paintings and foreign lovers and wine that tasted like freedom. Mum would smile while listening, saying things like, "She's so brave, so full of life." I'd be folding laundry in the next room, listening through the thin wall. That's when the shrinking began. At first it was small. I stopped talking about books I loved, about the short stories I wrote in secret. Then it was bigger. Jobs I turned down, relationships I avoided, chances I never took. All so the people around me could shine a little brighter, unbothered by my shadow. By 25, I knew how to disappear in plain sight. That year, I helped Maya plan her wedding. She barely thanked me. At the reception, Mom gave a toast. We always knew Maya was destined for something special. I smiled. I even clapped. Afterward, a guest asked if I was the maid of honor. I said no, just the sister. And even I wasn't sure if I meant hers or the family's. I remember the night I finally understood the role I'd been assigned. It wasn't at some dramatic family event or in the wake of a public humiliation. It was subtle, quiet, as most betrayals are when they come from people who claim to love you. It was a Tuesday, I think. I had just landed a job offer at a publishing house, entry-level but prestigious. It would have required me to move to Chicago, live on my own, make something of the stories I'd kept locked in journals since high school. I told Mum over tea, cautious, hopeful. She nodded, stirred her cup. "But you just started helping at the centre, and the boys at the youth group adore you." I blinked. "Mum, this is something I've wanted." She didn't argue, just smiled faintly and said, "Of course, if you think it's worth leaving everything behind." Everything. Like my life here mattered more to others than it did to me. I turned down the job. It wasn't until years later that I found out Maya had called that same night. She'd missed a rent payment, needed help moving, and Mom had promised her I'd be around. That's why she pushed me to stay, not because I was needed, but because Maya was. I started to notice it everywhere after that. When I bought a car, Mum reminded me how Maya's was getting old. When I wanted to travel, she mentioned how hard Maya had it with 2 kids. Every moment of independence was guilt-wrapped and handed back to me with a smile. The worst part? I accepted it. Because deep down, I believed that maybe, if I kept doing the right things, being the good daughter, the supportive sister, they'd finally see me. Not as the dependable one, not as the helper, but as someone worth loving for reasons that didn't serve someone else. It never happened. By 30, I'd become an expert in vanishing. Birthdays came and went. Holidays passed with quiet handshakes and questions about Maya's life. I answered them all, smiled through each one, until eventually I couldn't remember the last time someone asked me how I was. Not really. It's a strange kind of grief, mourning a version of yourself that never got to exist. There's a photograph that used to hang in my parents' hallway. A family portrait taken when I was 12 and Maya was 9. We wore matching dresses, pink with white collars, posed stiffly in front of a generic studio backdrop. Maya beamed like she was born for the camera. I smiled too, but it never quite reached my eyes. For years, I'd pause in front of that photo every time I visited, waiting for something. Recognition, maybe, a sense of belonging. But it never came. Once, I asked my mom if she remembered that day. She laughed, said, "Oh yes, Maya cried because she didn't want to wear pink, but you were such a trooper." That was her memory. Maya, emotional, me, cooperative. She didn't remember that I had a fever, that I'd asked to reschedule, that I'd swallowed down a sore throat and dressed anyway because she'd already paid for the session. That was the theme of my childhood, being remembered for how well I endured things, not how I felt about them. I carried that into adulthood. When Maya forgot my birthday one year, I reminded her gently, made a joke of it. When she asked me to babysit for the third weekend in a row, I said yes, even though I'd planned a weekend away. When Mum forgot my promotion, I sent her flowers anyway. I trained everyone around me to expect my silence, my compliance, my help. And in return, I received proximity to praise I never earned, proximity to warmth that was always meant for someone else. The hardest part wasn't the neglect, it was the constant implication that I was okay with it, that I didn't need the spotlight because I was strong, independent, low maintenance. People love those words. They sound like compliments until you realize they're just euphemisms for, we don't have to worry about you. And if they don't worry about you, they don't see you. That dinner when Mum praised Maya so openly, it wasn't a new wound. It was just the final confirmation of something I'd spent a lifetime suspecting. I was never the favourite. I was the fallback, the foundation, the one you stand on so others can reach higher, and I was tired of being the floor. The silence after the storm is never as quiet as people think. It hums, it pulses, it waits. 3 days had passed since that dinner. I hadn't returned any calls. Maya's texts grew shorter, sharper. You need to fix this. She's not eating. What did you say? But I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to crawl back into the role I'd finally stepped out of. Then on the 4th day, my phone rang again. Todd, Maya's husband, a man who barely acknowledged me at family functions, the kind of person who sends one-word replies and expects praise for participation. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Curiosity won. Rachel, he began, stiff and rehearsed. Look, I don't want to get involved, but your mum, she's really upset. Maya said you said something cruel. I exhaled, slow and steady. I told the truth, Todd. A pause, a shuffle on his end, maybe pacing. She's been crying for days. She won't come out of her room. Lindsay's worried sick. Lindsay. The name still scraped against me, even when spoken by someone else. I didn't yell. I didn't insult her, I said. I said I've learned to live without her pride. That's it. Another pause, longer this time. He didn't know what to say to that. Most people didn't when the words were calm and cut too deep to deflect. Well, he cleared his throat, maybe next time? Think about how things sound before you say them. She's old, Rachel. You scared her. That's when I laughed. Not a cruel laugh. A tired one. The kind that escapes when someone expects you to shoulder the blame for their mess just because you've always done it. I'm not the one who should be scared, Todd. I've been living in the silence she built for 40 years. He didn't respond. Not really. Just mumbled something about hoping we can move on and hung up. I placed the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. Cracks I'd never noticed ran from corner to corner like veins in plaster. I traced them with my eyes and thought, this is what happens when you hold too much in for too long. The structure looks fine, until one day it doesn't. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind churned not with guilt, but with memories. All the small moments I'd shoved aside, all the things I hadn't said, until now. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a knock. Not urgent, not frantic, just steady, intentional. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. There's a certain kind of tension Maya carries with her when she's not in control, like static before lightning. I waited. She knocked again, then stood in silence, rehearsing. I could practically hear the script flipping in her mind, trying to find the version where she still came out the hero. When I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation. We need to talk, she said, stepping inside like it was still her house, like my space was just an extension of the family stage. I didn't offer coffee or a chair. She paced. You really couldn't hold it together for one dinner, she snapped. Do you know what you did to Mum? I stayed quiet, not out of restraint, but precision. I wanted her to unravel before she could pin it on me. She hasn't eaten. She won't speak to anyone. Dad's worried sick. She paused, then spat it out. All because you needed to have some little meltdown over a throwaway comment. There it was, a throwaway comment, as if 40 years of being overlooked could be discarded as easily as a napkin. I finally spoke. "Do you even remember what I gave up for you?" Her face faltered. "What are you talking about?" I went to the closet and pulled out the old envelope, the University of Oregon letter, still creased at the corners like memory trying to fold itself smaller. I handed it to her. She read it in silence. Her mouth opened once, then shut again. "You stayed?" she whispered. I didn't nod. Didn't need to. I stepped closer. "You remember the vodka Mom found under my bed in '98? She flinched. "She thought it was mine. You let her." "I didn't think you remembered that," she muttered, eyes fixed on the rug. I stared at her, really stared, at the woman who had taken so much from me and still expected me to feel guilty for finally noticing. "That night," I said, "was the first time I realized I was the decoy, the distraction, the one who cleaned up your messes so you could keep glowing." I walked to the door, held it open. I told Mom the truth, the real truth. She never loved me. She just needed me. Maya didn't move. Then she asked, "What do you want, Rachel? An apology? A redo?" I almost laughed. "No, I just want you to remember." I didn't expect a letter, not after everything. But there it was, slipped under my door like a ghost afraid of confrontation. No handwriting I recognized immediately, no return address. Just quiet, calculated delivery. It felt like a bribe disguised as regret. I held it for a moment before opening it. Not out of suspense, but because I knew whatever was inside was going to be something between an apology and an excuse. Inside were three things. The first, a handful of photographs. All of me, at different ages, but always in the background, never centered. In one, I was holding a doll on Christmas morning, eyes wide, face expectant. In another, I stood in the rain at one of Maya's soccer games, wrapped in a poncho, a forced smile on my face. Always watching, never seen. The second, a torn page from a diary, mine. From when I was 10, I didn't remember writing it until I saw the words, "I hope one day Mommy smiles at me like she smiles at Maya." My handwriting, large, uneven, desperate. But it was the third item that stopped me. Beneath that childhood scrawl, in recent ink, my mother had written, "You always were good enough. I just didn't know how to show it." I stared at the words, expecting something, anything to happen. Tears, rage, relief. But nothing came, just a deep, echoing stillness. Too late, too far gone. Some truths, even when spoken, don't heal. They confirm, they cement. They say, "Yes, you were right. We just never had the courage to admit it." I folded the page, walked to the kitchen, burned it. Not in fury, but in clarity, because that little girl deserved more than a late confession scribbled in guilt. She deserved love when it would have changed her. And I was done holding on to evidence of what I never received. The ash curled slowly in the sink. As it turned black, I felt something release, not forgiveness, but permission. Permission to stop hoping, permission to stop proving, permission to finally be done. Later that evening, as twilight cast long shadows across the walls, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and no expectations. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family in days. Not Maya, not Mum, not even Dad. The group chat remained unopened, silent in its passive-aggressive way. A shared digital space where truths never surfaced. Only emojis and updates about Maya's children. And I didn't care. Because silence had finally become my sanctuary, not something forced upon me, but something I chose. Until the phone rang again. Dad. I considered ignoring it, but something in me, it wasn't hope, maybe habit, made me answer. "Hey, kid," he said softly, voice lined with hesitation. "Your mom. She's not doing great." I stayed quiet. "She's barely eating. She's just lying in bed. Maya's worried. I don't know what to do." His words were familiar, practiced. like he'd said them 1,000 times in other situations, when Maya got in trouble, when Mom felt slighted by something small, always trying to keep the peace without ever confronting the storm. "I think maybe," he continued, "if you just called her, said something kind, it might help." There it was, the ask, the expectation that I would once again be the balm, the fixer, the one who made things easier for everyone else. I almost laughed, but instead I said, maybe she needs to sit with the things she's always chosen not to see. He exhaled slowly, not frustrated, resigned. "All right," he murmured. "Just let me know if you change your mind." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it down and pulling out a sheet of paper. If they wanted something from me, they were going to get it, but not in the way they expected. I wrote a letter, not poetic, not emotional, just factual, a list of all the moments I'd been erased. When Maya got suspended and you told people it was me, I stayed silent. When you missed my graduation because Maya had the flu, I told everyone it was fine. When I drove you to chemo and waited outside while Maya worked, you told the neighbours she never left your side. When you smiled like the sun at Maya's wedding and couldn't even fake it at mine, I swallowed the lump in my throat. At the end, I wrote one final sentence. I never wanted to be better than her. I just wanted to be seen. I sealed it, walked to their house under cover of night, and dropped it in their mailbox. Then I turned around and didn't look back. For 3 days, nothing. No calls, no texts. Not even the usual photos of Maya's kids clogging the group chat. The silence was different now. No longer just absence, but strategy. A cold calculation cloaked in inaction. Families like mine don't implode with screaming matches or broken dishes. We unravel in silence. We rewrite truths through omission. We punish with distance while pretending it's respect. I thought the letter might crack something open, but all I got was more quiet. And then, on the 4th morning, something arrived. Not a call, not a knock, another envelope, slipped under my door like the first. No name, no return address. But I knew. Inside was a folded photograph. Me, maybe age 11, at the science fair. A ribbon pinned to my shirt. Maya standing next to me, grinning wide, though she hadn't competed. Mom's handwriting on the back. Maya supporting her sister at the fair, so proud. Not Rachel won, not Rachel's ribbon, just Maya. Always Maya. I let the photo fall to the table, more amused than angry. There was also a note, short and scrawled. I don't remember it that way, but maybe you're right. That was it, the closest I'd ever come to a concession. I didn't know if it was Mom who wrote it or Dad on her behalf, maybe Maya. But it didn't matter, because it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement. It was a sidestep, a subtle last-ditch effort to rewrite the story in their favour. I stood by the window and watched the breeze toy with the curtains, thinking about how long I'd accepted that kind of half-love. The kind that makes you question your own memories just because someone else claims not to share them. And I realised then that what I'd done, what I said at dinner, what I'd written in that letter, it wasn't destruction, it was release, not for them, for me. I was no longer responsible for holding their narrative together. Let them spin it however they liked. I was free. That evening I found myself at the edge of the neighbourhood, in a little bar where no one knew my name and no one asked questions. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old vinyl, the kind of place where the world slows down and lets you breathe. I ordered a glass of wine, something red and forgiving, and sat near the window. The quiet here was different. Not sharp like the one in my family's house, not heavy like the kind that settled in after Maya left a room. This was real silence, honest. It didn't press against your ribs or ask you to justify your place. I sipped slowly and let my shoulders fall. It's strange how foreign it feels to relax when you've spent your life bracing. A friend joined me later, someone who understood the language of restraint. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. One look at me and she knew I'd stopped performing. We didn't talk about family, or grief, or the absurdity of being asked to explain a boundary to people who only ever saw you as support structure. We just sat. And I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because something inside me had finally uncoiled, the tension, the resentment, the constant need to be useful, gone. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything, and that feeling, it wasn't joy, not exactly, it was clarity. A stillness that said, you survived, you're still here, and that's enough. I glanced at my phone once, not to check for missed calls, but to delete the family group chat. No anger, no ceremony, just one quiet tap, gone. Maybe one day I'll talk to them again. Maybe I won't. Real life doesn't come with clean endings, only distance, and sometimes distance is the beginning of peace. A few mornings later I found the final letter, not in the mailbox, not under my door, but in my apartment, resting on the kitchen counter like it had always belonged there. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. How it got there, I didn't know. I didn't ask. Maybe Maya had a spare key. Maybe guilt does strange things to people who've spent a lifetime avoiding it. I stood for a long time before opening it. Inside were more photos, older now. Me as a toddler, smiling wide in a sandbox. Me at 17, standing next to a birthday cake, candles glowing, alone in the frame. Me again, seated on the floor, surrounded by books I loved and no one ever noticed. And tucked behind them, a page from an old diary, mine. I had no memory of writing it, but the words sliced clean. I wish I mattered like Maya does. Below it, written freshly in my mother's elegant, hesitant script. You always did. I just didn't know how to show it. I read it twice, 3 times. Still, I felt no catharsis, no grand, sweeping forgiveness rising up in me, because it was too late. Even truth has an expiration date. The damage wasn't in what was said or unsaid, but in how long it took for anyone to say it. I folded the paper and stared at it under the morning light, golden and soft and completely indifferent to all of this history. Then I struck a match, held it steady, and let it burn, not from rage, not even sadness, but because I couldn't carry it anymore. Some truths are like anchors, and I was finally ready to stop sinking. I watched the page curl and blacken in the sink, the flame flickering like a heartbeat before it died. Then I opened the window and breathed. Later that day, I walked through the city like it was new to me. Not because anything had changed, same cracks in the sidewalk, same hum of distant traffic, but because something inside me had shifted. A recalibration, slow and subtle, like the ache that fades only after you forget to notice it. I passed a park where kids were playing, laughter sharp against the wind. And for a second, I wondered if Maya's kids ever asked about me, if they knew I existed outside the occasional Aunt Rachel reference in passing. Then I let the thought go. Some people inherit legacies, others walk away from them. When I returned home, I did one final thing. I took the last photo from the letter, one of me at maybe 5 years old, clinging to a teddy bear, eyes wide with the kind of hope only children have. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember what she was thinking, what she needed, what she believed she could still become. Then gently, I slid the photo into a drawer, not to forget her, but to finally let her rest. The doorbell rang that evening. It was my friend again, the one from the bar. She brought takeout and no questions. We ate on the floor, surrounded by the hum of streetlights and shared silence. After dinner, I told her everything. The dinner, the words, the letter, the fire. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pity me. When I finished, she simply said, "Good." And that was all I needed. Because sometimes healing isn't about being held. It's about being heard, and still held after. That night, I slept with the window open. The city was loud, alive, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was shrinking to fit inside someone else's story. I was finally writing my own. The next morning, I woke up with no plans, no expectations, no one waiting on a response or a role to play. Just me and the stillness of a life that finally belonged to me. Coffee tasted different, not better, just quieter. Like it was meant for me alone, not as part of some performance. I sat by the window watching light creep across the buildings and opened my journal for the first time in months. The page stared back like a blank slate, but it didn't scare me the way it used to. I didn't feel the pressure to record something profound or meaningful. I just wrote, "Today I begin again," and for once I meant it. No part of me wanted to rush back into family dynamics, into damage control, into the guilt-laced silences and choreographed apologies. I didn't need an ending tied up in bows. What I had was enough: clarity, space, and a sense that my story was no longer being ghost-written by people who couldn't see me. I spent the rest of the day walking, through bookstores, by the river, nowhere in particular. I didn't check my phone, didn't think about Maya or Mom or what anyone else needed from me. I just existed, and it felt revolutionary. That evening, I lit a candle. Not for memory, not for grief, for peace. I poured a glass of the good wine, played the record I'd been saving for a moment that mattered. And as the first notes filled the room, I smiled. Not the polite kind I used at family dinners, but one that reached the parts of me I'd long since forgotten were allowed to feel full. Because freedom doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in with a whisper. And when it does, you hold it gently. Like breath, like truth, like home. As the song faded and the candle flickered low, I opened my laptop. Not out of habit, but instinct. I didn't check emails or scroll through old photos. I opened a blank document and stared at it, letting the cursor blink like a heartbeat. I didn't know what I was going to write, but I knew I had something to say, not to Maya, not to my mother, to myself. I began typing slowly, hesitantly at first, then steadier. I used to think love had to be earned, that if I was good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe someone would finally see me, maybe then I'd matter. But I was wrong. Love that needs proof isn't love. It's control dressed as kindness, and I've lived too long under that disguise. I paused, breathed, typed again. I forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a declaration. I didn't hit save. I didn't print it. I just left it there, glowing on the screen like a promise whispered to the dark. Then I closed the laptop, pushed back from the table, and stood in a silence that didn't ache anymore. It was just quiet, clean, earned. I curled up on the couch, blanket around my shoulders, and watched the city lights blur through the window. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a dog barked, laughter spilled from a nearby bar. Life, unfiltered. I smiled again, because finally, I didn't need to belong in someone else's story. I was enough in my own. The next morning came soft and slow. No buzz of urgency, no guilt coiled tight in my chest, just the kind of stillness that feels earned, like exhaling after holding your breath for decades. I made breakfast for myself, 2 eggs, toast, fresh berries, no one watching, no one to impress. And for the first time in a long while, I ate without rushing, without distraction, without replaying conversations in my head, trying to decode what I should have said differently. There was nothing left to replay, just space. Around midday, I wandered down to the bookstore again, the same one I'd passed so many times and never entered because I didn't have time or didn't think I was allowed to linger. This time, I did. I walked slowly through the aisles, running my fingers over spines, letting the titles whisper possibilities. I picked out a novel I'd been meaning to read for years and bought it without hesitation. A small thing, but it felt like a rebellion, a reclaiming. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. I stood in its warmth and just let it hit my skin. No errands, no expectations, just me, alive and whole. And that's when I knew the truth. This story wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I reclaimed, my voice, my time, myself. Not a version shaped by comparison or compromise, but the woman who had always been waiting underneath. She was never gone, just quiet. Until now.